she came to me and would say, Mom, when you were gone, Dad was watching inappropriate things on the TV and I saw him. He took some time to take her on a hike and be alone with her. And he told her that he wanted to give her a blessing. She was like, Mom, I don't like the game that Dad played. Well, he kept telling me to get his flashlight, but I know it wasn't a flashlight. He and I were married almost 13 years. We were young Mormon. Within 9 months of being married, we found out that we were pregnant with Lauren. And when Lauren was 8 months old, we found out that the second one was on the way, also unexpected. And about 6 or 7 years later, we had my third child. And then the fourth one was about a year or 2.5 years after that. So altogether, we had 4 beautiful kids. We lived in this small, beautiful town, Utah. It felt like the perfect life. We were just working together to raise a good family. When we dealt with issues in our marriage, a lot of them were surrounding in some way as far as like, kind of this, compulsive need to escape to. There were times where I would discover connections with other women, things like that. He would cry and apologize and just kind of explain it as being broken or whatever. But there was nothing about him that indicated that he would have a child. I started noticing subtle changes in Lauren. She was a really goofy, silly kid when she was really young. But as she got older to like 5, 6, 7 years old, she became far more serious. She was constantly getting UTIs. I'd have to take her into the doctor. She would end up with a bladder infection. And it would happen over and over again. Now, is this always something that screams? Not necessarily, but it's definitely a red flag. That was definitely a problem for her, to the point where she would end up with kidney infection. There was a time where I even asked the pediatrician, I was like, is there a chance that this could indicate? And the pediatrician was like, that's not really where I think this is headed. She said, we will look into structural abnormalities, and there are a lot of other reasons for this to happen. She didn't act afraid of him in any way, but she did get more and more attached to me as time went on, where if I was leaving for too long, she seemed to get upset about that. She was excessively modest to the point where it was very, very easy for her to feel shame about her body or anything like that. When I would ask her questions to try and see, is it possible she's experiencing it? Not only did she say, no, that's not happening to me, but she also really reacted negatively to those conversations. She would get scared and be like, why are we even talking about this? Navigating those instincts and feeling like this may be what's happening to her. And then having to consider, she doesn't spend time away from home, so it's clearly got to be somebody that we know. It's got to be somebody that has access to her that I've never thought to worry about. So, considering, okay, could it be my dad? I'd never think that, but could it be my dad? So I'd, kind of watch my dad with her, and could it be my brother? And I'd watch my brother with her, and I'm not seeing anything, could it be my husband's family? Could it be my husband's dad? And then I began to get a lot more concerned. I zeroed in on his dad when I realized he completely favors her. Out of all the grandkids, Lauren was his princess. She was perfect. She did everything right. And they just loved taking care of her and spending time with her and all that. And it's during that time that we're sitting down for dinner and his parents had been visiting. And I was going to dish up Lauren's food and I said, how hungry are you? And she looked sideways at Grandpa. And Grandpa says to her, he goes, Lauren, don't tell. And I was like, what? And I knew they had gone to the grocery store earlier. And I knew what he was talking about. I knew what he was referring to, but suddenly it was this secret. So she looks conflicted, and finally I just exploded. I was like, I already know it's a chocolate donut. It doesn't matter, but you don't tell her to keep a secret. It was a very awkward dinner that night, but it really alarmed me. And so I was worried that if I brought this up to my husband, that he would be furious with me for suggesting this about his dad. But when there was enough signs, I brought it to my husband and was like, hey, listen, your dad's been saying this to Lauren, and I'm really concerned. And instead of him getting angry at me, he was like, what? And he got really angry, and he vowed to me that he was going to help me protect her from his dad, just in case. And that, he was going to help me watch and make sure his dad was never alone with him. Lauren assures me, even now to this day, she's 20 years old, and she assures me that she was never her grandpa. I think that my husband's reaction at the time was just relief for the scrutiny to not be on him. They were going on a camping trip with some scouts. At that time that she went on the trip, I think that's when they had escalated the most that it had so far. And she was beginning to understand that it wasn't okay. There were uncomfortable moments that she had. He took some time to take her on a hike and be alone with her. And he told her that he wanted to give her a blessing. A priesthood blessing is something that men in the church, men exclusively, can give, and it has to be men who hold the priesthood. And he took that opportunity to give her a blessing to forget the things that he had done to her, which is so incredibly manipulative. He took that as an opportunity to kind of tell her to forget what he had done and to make her believe that all was well and that he had prayed to God to fix it. Once she did finally disclose to me, there was an event that really stood out to her that had happened just a few months prior to when she finally told me. And it was the event that was kind of the most obvious instance of it. That's where it was like she was pretty sure she understood this was wrong. When I have the pieces of the things that he admitted to and the things that she disclosed, he probably did it often during times where he was not doing well mentally. That's not an excuse in any way. I'm just saying I could trace it to that and be like, okay, when he was falling apart, this is what he would do, which would then cause him to be like, oh my gosh, what have I just done? And then he'd snap out of it, and suddenly he'd be the best dad and the best husband ever. And he'd be like, oh, everything's okay again. So as she was experiencing the cycles herself, I and the rest of the family was also experiencing those cycles, but just in a different way. I think that, in looking at what happened in my family and what happened with my former husband, I still don't think that he calculated how to her. I think he calculated how to hide it, and I think he calculated how to protect himself afterwards, but I don't think he calculated in ways how to do it. I think he did it and then was like, oh, I've got to protect myself. What led to me finally hitting the point where I was like, I'm afraid it could be him. It could be my husband. It was cumulative. It was actually putting pieces together from, throughout her life and realizing that there were times that she told me about something happening that I didn't understand or realize had been a flag that he may be her. A good example is the number of times that she came to me and would say, Mom, when you were gone, Dad was watching inappropriate things on the TV and I saw him. And then it was, oh, when you were in the store getting milk and bread or who knows what, and he was in the car with them, Mom, Dad was looking at inappropriate pictures in the front seat on his phone. And I was like, oh, it was probably a pop-up. And they were like, no, he was zooming in. So he's doing these things in front of the kids. And I started to realize, what if he wanted them to see him? And she was probably maybe 5 years old. I just went to check in on her before I went to bed, and she was awake. And she was like, Mom, I don't like the game that Dad played. And I said, what game? And she said that he had, she said, well, he kept telling me to get his flashlight, but I know it wasn't a flashlight. She was really bothered by it. And she kept saying that, well, he told me I needed to get the flashlight out of his pocket, but I know it wasn't a flashlight. I didn't like it. So when he disclosed, as during his polygraph exams, he disclosed an incident that matched up with that. And I was like, oh my gosh, there was a time where he was gone on another camping trip with scouts. It was me and Lauren and my 2 baby boys. And that was all for a week. We were alone together. And I was noticing her mood was getting worse and worse. She wasn't eating. I would offer food. She just didn't eat. I'm like, what is going on? I started asking her questions about, talking about eating disorders, things like that. She's like, no, that's not, she was really just kind of like, Mom, leave me alone. I'm sitting at the kitchen table with her and she won't talk to me about why she's not eating and why she's just in a terrible mood. And she was always getting sick. And I finally just said, do you have a secret? And she paused for a minute and thought, and she said, no. And then she goes, well, Dad didn't say I can't tell, just that I didn't have to tell you. And I was like, what? And she opened up a little bit, but not in a way that was completely obvious. It was in a way that what she told me at that point, and I know I'm being vague on this, but I only share what her limits are, if that makes sense. And so there are certain things I don't talk about publicly. What she shared at that moment was enough for me to, enough to alarm me, but it wasn't enough for me to be 100% sure that it was And at the same time, I spoke to him about it, and his explanation was he said she misunderstood it. He said, he kind of explained it as he probably just didn't handle it well, and he was probably just being an awkward dad. And I didn't like the explanation. It didn't really make sense to me. And he came back from that visit, and he was so He was just like he was a free man, and he was so happy about it. And I said, well, how'd it go? And he was like, okay. He's like, well, this is the thing. I told him about and we talked about that, and I left, but then I came back and I told him that he was so proud of himself because he came back and he confessed to the bishop that he had thoughts about our daughter. So when I explained this to our bishop, he said, this sounds like, or he probably didn't say it like that, but he basically said, this needs to be reported. The next step is to go to DCFS. And so we moved forward. He helped me, look up the number and, start a case, open up a case with DCFS. They called us a couple days later and set up a time for an interview. So once the interview was set up with DCFS, I knew that my daughter was about to be asked a lot of invasive questions. And I had always been so scared to ask her too invasive of questions because I didn't want to plant ideas in her head. And so I thought, well, since someone else is about to ask her these questions, I guess it's okay for me to do it now. So I was driving her to her art class and while we were in the car, and so I said, hey, so when you told me about your secret, I don't know if I really heard everything I needed to. And so I just said, can you just tell me again from the beginning what happened? And this time, when she told me, she was a lot more clear about what had happened, and it stunned me because I felt just sick to my stomach because what she explained this time was absolutely without question. And so I knew at that moment, all that was left now was he needed to get out of the house. That is when I fell apart. I'm not somebody who experiences panic attacks, but I'm pretty sure that's what I experienced then. I knew I needed him to be out of the house when we got home because I thought, how is she supposed to face him now? After telling me this, so I messaged him. I said, hey, listen, I was like, Lauren told me what happened. You need to be out of the house. This has been reported to DCFS. We're going to have to do an interview. And he kind of was just, what? Okay. He made a big dramatic scene. He packed a suitcase and hugged them all and cried and told them how much he loved them. And then he left. He had an office space in town. So it was like maybe 5-10 minutes from where we lived. And so that's where he went to stay. Lauren and I went to the Children's Justice Center. I was shaking going into this interview because I wasn't sure that I was going to leave with my daughter. I genuinely believe that there was a possibility that my kids would be taken from me because this happened in my home and I didn't see it. So I remember being stunned when the detective who was interviewing me stopped for a minute at some point and said something along the lines of, one, you did the right thing. And they said, you're a good mom. I had already told her from the very beginning when she first disclosed this that, one, it was not her fault at all, that she hadn't done anything to make it happen, but also that it should not have happened. I let her know, you'll be in therapy for a while, and that's not really an option. And they did different things like EMDR therapy to kind of help her with some of the more traumatic moments and incidents. And also sand play therapy. That's something that I really had to learn moving forward with her and with my kids was being a safe parent. Lauren really needed to be talked through a lot and she really had to process. And that's been significant for her is when the most significant incident happened. It was the one that he was arrested and charged for and went to prison for. After she said she wasn't sure what to do. She kind of froze during the incident. And then she just got up and left the room. And she went and sat on the couch. I think she was watching TV, she said. And after a while, he came out to where she was and he sat down next to her. And he said, hey, I want to talk to you. Do you understand why I did what I did? And she said, no. And he said, well, I was testing you. I wanted to make sure that you would never let somebody do that to you. Basically gave her the safety talk after he had just and said, I was testing you to make sure that you would stop somebody, that you wouldn't let somebody do that, which then reframes it for her as she failed a test. He very quietly, very subtly made it her fault and then comforted her for not having handled it right. And so then she just held this shame. So when he was arrested, I started getting a phone call from someone who lived across the street from us and who was friends with our family because he had seen it happen. My former husband was arrested in a parking lot outside of his work building and brought to the local jail. And my neighbor watched that all happen from the same work building and called me and was like, "Are you okay?" Because I just saw him get arrested. And he didn't ask me to explain it. He just said, "Are you guys okay? Are you all set for Christmas? Do you need anything?" And that is how a lot of the people there functioned. They were amazing. That night, people showed up at my house. People brought food constantly. They fed us for months. They just looked out for us. And it was really amazing. I and my children are no longer part of the LDS Church. The community is not what caused me to pull away. I did pull away with my kids eventually because I realized that I could not raise my kids in that church and continue to give them the healthy messages that they needed to. That's when we left Utah and we moved to, we left Utah not long after I came to that conclusion. But it also followed the same timing of when my former husband was being released from prison on parole. He ended up taking a plea deal. So he was originally charged with a felony that carried a minimum of 15 years in Utah. But he was given a plea deal because he insisted on taking it to trial, which would have made 10-year-old or 11-year-old Lauren have to take the stand and testify and be cross-examined in front of a whole courtroom. To avoid that, the prosecutor offered him a plea deal. Basically, he gets fewer years in prison for this deal in exchange for she doesn't have to testify and be cross-examined and be re-traumatized like that. He still had to register for life on the offender registry, so he will be on that registry forever. And he is not allowed to contact the family in any way or see the kids at all until they're 18 and if they choose to. But yeah, he was released about 3.5 years later on parole, and it was definitely time for us to leave Utah and just leave those memories behind and start a new life. I had supportive family and supportive friends and neighbors. And so I wasn't faced with the thought of, if I make him leave, how do we survive? But there are so many mothers who, yes, the right thing to do no matter what is to keep your kids safe. I think it's important for parents to understand when it comes to protecting their kids that protecting your children starts far before you ever think something's wrong. That the kind of relationship you set up with them, the kind of dynamic that they experience throughout their, as they're growing up, when it comes to how do my parents react when I tell them about something? How do my parents react when I've done something wrong? As Lauren was healing and processing all of this stuff, there were a lot of times where our relationship was very strained. I knew that some of it was because she had to process the fact that for however long, she carried it alone. And, she has never been a child who's been resentful to me about it in any clear. She and I are very close, and I'm so proud of her. I'm so proud of how she's grown. I'm so proud of the woman that she is. She is strong and bright. She's 20 now, and she is absolutely amazing. So when it comes to myself and how much I've grown and learned, I don't even recognize who I was back then. I've always been somebody who was considered a strong woman. There was so much I didn't understand about what that really meant. How to find my own strength, how to take responsibility for unhealthy dynamics and to fix those in my life. How to begin to separate what should be on my shoulders versus what should be on somebody else's shoulders. I have become a much, instead of quietly strong, I've become much more of a fierce, strong type woman, but a lot of that was done through slow work. I had somebody ask me recently, how did you climb out of, because they were struggling with, with some emotions and struggling with feeling kind of stuck in that survival mode. And I said, I know it's an awful feeling. I remember being there, and it felt suffocating. And they said, how did you climb out? And I was like, I don't know. But then I realized, okay, I guess it was actually just through refusing to stop. I remember not too long ago feeling like this is never going to end. I'm never going to climb out of what this did to me. It really kind of broke me a lot. And it took, like I said, it's been 10 years. And I feel like I could probably say I've only just recently, in the past, maybe 2 years, stopped feeling like I am never going to climb out of the private darkness that I was experiencing. I worked really hard to make sure my kids didn't see it. But I had a hard time climbing out of that. And so I think I wish I could go back and tell myself that I was doing what I needed to do. Like that just, doing all the things, getting up every day and doing the things that you need to and being there for your kids and all those things, and just moving forward little by little is actually enough. That's going to eventually get you to the place that you need to go. Taking time to learn, being patient with myself, all of those things. Not just curling up in a ball.